Welcome, friends, to season 6 of the Work Item Podcast. It's the kickoff episode, and we have a wonderful guest today. As always, Marisa Morby. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Well, I am, so excited to be learning about UX research because it's one of those areas that everybody wants to talk about it, but nobody knows what exactly that is and how to do it right. So, welcome. Congratulations on being the UX researcher of the year for us.
Of the year?
Of the
Yes.
year. The year started.
I'll take it.
You are I want to say, a very seasoned researcher, and you have a career that spans a multitude of roles, a multitude of companies. What started it all? Where did it all begin for Marisa?
Well, I think so. A long time ago, I was not in tech at all. I actually started out a long time ago, like probably 15 years ago, in human resources. And I worked at a sporting goods company where I did like HR, admin, and management and stuff. And my soul was slowly dying doing that. And so I was like, I can't do this forever. I need to do something else. And so I took a break and was traveling. And I had originally done like some copywriting in the past, and I knew how to code a little bit. And so I was doing basically like small contracts where I was helping people with their copywriting and updating their websites and stuff like that. And in doing that, they would give me kind of a design brief that I would go through, and I would fix up the design and we would talk about the copy. And then I was like, where are you getting this information? And they would say, oh, it's just what I thought we should put on there. And I was like, that seems bad. And so I eventually started to get I was like, do you have a list of customers that I can talk to? Because in my mind, that made the most sense. And so I would, talk to their customers, get quotes, get all these things, not just testimonials, but like kind of understand how they were talking about the product, how they were talking about the site or whatever it was. And then I'd put that into the copy. And change this design and the site based on that. And so from there, I kind of fell into it because it was not something that I meant to do. It was like, I love talking to people and I love learning how people think. I love learning what makes them do the things they do. So that was already kind of easy and something that I just love to talk about anyway. And then I slowly started applying it through doing contracts and stuff like that. And then I eventually went to a data optimization company that was very focused on doing testing and like conversion optimization. And it was me and one other woman there that we were like, we need to have qualitative research to back up some of this stuff because we were starting to get questions that we couldn't answer through quantitative data. It doesn't matter how big your data set is if you're trying to ask why something is happening. You're just quantitative data can get you so far, but it can't get you to understand why something is happening. And so the two of us created this like a qualitative research arm of in the company, and that helped us from like a business perspective, like helped us get more clients. Our clients were happier because they were able to answer different questions. And so that kind of really led me down the path of like all research, just because it was so much fun. And I don't know, it was really fun to be able to build out an entire program like that. And so from then I've been doing like research design and product focused roles. Sometimes the title changes, but the work tasks are very similar.
It sounds like it was a very much an organic kind of pickup of the field where you were kind of naturally realize that, hold on a second, like, who are we doing this for? Which is interesting because for a lot of folks, it doesn't quite come as a first hunch of like, well, let's go and talk to customers. It's more like, oh, well, okay, well, like, who do I go to and ask what to build? And instead, you just kind of like thought about the customer, the person at the end on the other end of the product, the consumer.
Yeah, and I think to me it was very much like I could build what I wanted or write what I wanted or do, whatever. But like a lot of times I would need to know more about the product they were selling too. And who better to learn that from than a customer, right? Because they're the ones using it, hopefully.
Right. And one of the things that you also alluded to was the focus on qualitative data versus quantitative data. Because in the tech space, I'll say that there is this kind of misconception that if only we have big data, we have the big data set, we have the massive tables of all the telemetry that we can aggregate, magically we'll find out what to build. And that's rarely the case. Tell us why. Why is qualitative just as important as quantitative, if not more?
So I think that I am always a big proponent of them working together. Quantitative data is fantastic for understanding larger trends and understanding the amount of people that are interested or not interested in something. And you can't get qualitative data typically on a scale that you can get quantitative data, right? Like you can send out information or get information from your product analytics or like get survey data. You can get like huge amounts of quantitative information, which is really helpful to understand base things like what are people interested in? What are they not interested in? What are they using? What are they not using? What are they doing? What are they not doing? Like it can tell you kind of these binary things that are really important. But what it can't tell you is behavior. It can't tell you or like why the behavior is happening. It can tell you behavior in like they are choosing to do this thing, they're choosing to click on this, or they're choosing to drop off at this point, but you can't figure out why. And unless it's something glaring like an actual error or a bug, you're not going to know unless you actually talk to someone and start to get, at least a base of information about how people are using the, like, if it's a product, how people are using the product and how that product lives within their own ecosystem, right? And how they use it on a regular basis.
Yeah, and it's especially because for a lot of quantitative data, you do have to make certain assumptions about why things are happening the way things are happening. Like you brought up the example of drop offs, and that is one of those things where you can kind of like, sure, you can look at the drop off data and assume that, oh, maybe our login form is not good or something like the performance, it didn't load fast enough. But in reality, like, you don't know. Maybe their cat walked into the room right as they were about to check out and they completely forgot about your card. And that's it. That's as complex as it gets. But if you're digging through the table, like you're going to be like, oh no, it's like we have like 17 milliseconds here, or here we had like 20. Like you're going to be drawing the wrong conclusions out of that data, even though you have the numbers. The numbers are right there.
Yep. We saw that. It's really interesting you say that, especially around like conversion, like when someone's checking out. Because at the agency I was at several years ago, we started to do the qualitative research on like the purchase form. Like so when you're putting in your credit card information, and there were drop offs in weird spots on the form that didn't make sense. And what we found was like a lot of times it would happen mostly on mobile. um, and so we were like, okay, well, is it like an issue with the form or like what's going on? And it was actually because a lot of times it was moms purchasing something, they were on their phone, and then their kid would like walk in and distract them in the middle of whatever they were doing, and they would either totally forget or like the kid would take the phone and get out of whatever it was they were doing. And so then they would like return hours later to finish the thing that they were trying to do, which was really fascinating. This was like, oh, we would have never known that if we hadn't talked to somebody.
It tells you the clear value of the qualitative insights because quant is not going to give you that same experience. Like there's no signal that can tell you that like, oh, well, the kid walked into the room and distracted them.
Right. And I think with only quantitative information, the thought would be, oh, well, something's wrong with the form. So let's reorganize the form. Like maybe it's because something's below the fold. Maybe it's because XYZ. And it's like none of those things were true. And so instead of trying to redesign the form to make it better, it was like, oh, we really just have to make sure that information persists so that they can come back to it. Or maybe we send them a reminder like, hey, do you remember that you're you like were in the middle of checking out.
So let's take a step back a little bit and talk about the skills that are needed for you to be a great UX researcher. So you called out at the very beginning that it was very much an organic kind of, it grew from an interest to focus on the customer. How did you identify the skills that you needed to develop to be effective? And then how did you develop them?
So I think the first thing is curiosity. I've always been an extremely curious person. Like, I don't know. I want to understand how things work and why. So I think that's thing one. Because if you're not curious in general, I think that it would be really difficult to do research. I think that the second thing is like being able to sit and listen and be silent. A lot of research is I ask a question, like I'm not usually on this side of the of the question set, but like a lot of it is asking a question and then being willing to sit silently and let someone either think through something or struggle through something or not understand something and just let them do it and like just be supportive by sitting and listening. So listening is huge, like being able to hear what they're saying, but also just not interrupt and let them be. So that was one, and that was probably the hardest thing for me to learn because I love to engage with people and I love talking to people, and so I want to help, I want to chat, and so it's hard for me. It was hard for me to learn to like sit quietly and not do anything. Um, so I think that was maybe the second thing, and then I think third was learning how to ask better questions. I think that there is this assumption that, oh, we can have a conversation. Obviously, we know what we're doing. And um, questions are not built the same. Like, you can have a really good question set that or something that you think is a really good question set, and then you go back and you look at your answers and you're not learning anything. So it was I read a lot of books on like how to ask better questions, and not just the things that we hear kind of a lot now, which are like don't ask yes or no questions, don't ask open-ended questions or things like that. But it was more like thinking about the end goal that you're trying to get to and then crafting a set of questions that allow you to get there without hemming the user or the person into like a section where they're like forced to only play within this one area. It's like asking questions that evoke wider range of answers so that you can understand as much as you can in the limited amount of time you've got. And that was fun because I love teaching people how to ask better questions too, because it's like, it's not something that you would think. You're like, I know how to ask a question. It's like, yes, but I bet there's a better way to ask the same thing and learn more information. So I think that is maybe the third thing. And then I would say the fourth thing that was really important to learn was storytelling. So you can get all this information, right? And learn about what people are saying, but it doesn't matter if you don't have a good way to convey it back to your team. And I think that for a researcher or a designer, one of the biggest skill sets we have to have is being able to tell a story that has impact and that like persuades people, because we as like that as the researcher or the designer, like we're intaking all of this information, and it's up to us to like advocate for the user and tell a story that is compelling enough that it makes the rest of the company come together for like a common goal. um, and that was something that I don't think I think I learned that a lot at the agency because, you know, when we created that qualitative research program, I had to write so many, like it was of course decks and presentations or whatever, but it was basically storytelling, right? Like I had to explain why this was important, why it mattered. create like an emotional connection of like, see how much happier people are, and here's why, and how we do it. So I learned the impact of storytelling there, and then in each role I've had since, it's like if you can create a compelling story, you're like 80% of the way there.
I love this breakdown. And from the things that you enumerated, you can always very easily tell who is a good researcher and who is just starting out. Like, I don't want to say bad because everybody always has to improve, right? Like there is kind of that gradient of things you have to go through. But there's a certain degree of when you get into a room, and like for example, one of the things that you mentioned was being able to be okay with silence. And that is instinctively hard because if you get into a conversation with a customer, and I've been in those rooms where you put a product in front of them and just ask them to walk through it and they get stuck somewhere. And the first instinct is always, oh, how about you press that button? Or how about you go and do this? And instead, you have to be okay with that awkward silence of just like, I'm just going to wait. Let's see what they do. And usually, for even the customer, that part is like, oh, should I say something? Should I maybe I'll just walk you through how I think, and that's extremely helpful. But you have to find that instinct to jump in and start kind of directing it.
And I think a big part of that too, especially when you're talking about product walkthroughs, which are so helpful and important, um, it's being able to create rapport and trust really quickly, because especially during product walkthroughs, people feel like they're being tested, and it is so scary to feel like people are watching you. You don't know what you're doing, and even if you do, like, I know that when I'm like, people are watching me type or doing something in Figma, like the second someone is looking, I forget how Figma works. And it's
It's
like,
uncomfortable,
I don't know where any of the buttons are. I don't know.
even
So,
though you worked with it for years, so
oh yeah.
you are the expert. But it's just like that feeling of somebody's watching you and analyzing your every
Yes.
move.
Yes. I was in Fig Jam the other day, and we were trying to, like, I was on a call with other designers. And so we were trying to, they were telling me comments and giving feedback. So I was like taking notes. And then I tried to like mock something up really quick. And I was like, where is this button? I don't even know where this button is. And I literally used it 5 minutes before the call. And it's like, now that they're watching me, I have no idea how this tool works.
Which is what usually happens. The other one that you mentioned is storytelling. How do you develop that skill set? Because in theory, it all sounds fine and dandy. Sure, be a good storyteller. What does it actually mean for somebody that wants to build that muscle?
Mhm. That is a great question. So I have a little bit of a head start or a cheat because I majored in creative writing, and so like I a lot of my undergrad was literally creating stories and learning how to put stories together. So I think there are a few ways though. There are a lot of good books around creating a story. Right? There's even like online. There's the Pixar story line that you can see that's broken out. So I think the first thing is maybe understanding what creates a story, like the components of a story. And then I think taking understanding that a good story has an emotional impact, which I think is not something we maybe inherently think about. It's like we just assume like, oh, it's a good story, and it's like, okay, well, why? And it's always because there's some type of emotional pull, right? And so I think understanding components of the story, understanding the emotional impact, and how you create that emotional impact. So you do that through characters and you character development, and you do that through like a triumph, like finding something. There's like victory at the end, right? That's a really good way, a simple way, um, to kind of think about the story components and the goal of it. And then I would say the best thing you can do is kind of practice putting together stories based on if you're thinking about work, like based on products, like product marketing is amazing at storytelling, right? If it's good product marketing. So looking at that and kind of working backwards, looking at testimonials and creating your own little story around the product and how does it sound? And I think the only difference is when you're doing it for research, instead of using like testimonials or showing what the product does, you're using actual participant quotes. And so what I do when I try to tell a story internally is I show the struggle first, right? So like, here's the thing that's happening. And if I have a video of someone struggling, oh my gosh, you should watch people rally. I mean, you should like how they rally around a problem when they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. So I talk about the struggle, or if I can, I show the struggle. And then I pull out information from that call and other calls about how we might solve it, and then give a suggested solution, either something that I've designed, like here's how we might fix it, or what the end state should be that it isn't currently. And you can do that in just a couple slides, right? Like that's 3 slides worth of stuff. Like show the struggle, show the show like the quotes and what people are saying, and then show the vision or the goal. And I think just doing that over and over again in a lot of different ways for different products, you can start to see how stories are put together, and it becomes a little bit more second nature.
And that can be applicable broadly to basically any product, like no matter what you're building, because we hear storytelling and inherently you kind of think of, oh, but my product, like I'm not building a video game. Like I'm not building something that is interactive or like it evokes that emotional response. But the reality is you can be building productivity software and there is still that story of how your customers discover your product, how they go through onboarding, how they go through the first week. And there's a lot of, and especially like you said, like putting quotes and actual customer experiences to the forefront makes a whole of a lot of a difference. A whole lot of a difference.
And I think too, like, everybody has an end goal they're trying to get to with productivity software. With like, I work at a data visualization company, so like they have different end goals than maybe that productivity software might, but they're all trying to get something done, and there's always a struggle in there somewhere. And so if you can identify that, and this is the really fun thing too, identify which ones are important,
Aha.
which is a
That's
whole
the
other
trick
thing.
question right there.
There's the trick question. Yeah. So like identifying not just what the struggles are, but which ones are important. Um, and that's really up to like you as a researcher, and if you have people that are in product at the company, to work together to figure out like what struggles are important and worth solving, because you probably can't solve everything.
So how do you develop that intuition for determining what's important? Because you can't put, yeah, sure, you can look at number of people that struggle with this. Okay, that's a number you can put. But I bet there's more to it. I bet at some point you as a researcher have that innate ability to say like there's more to this than meets the eye. Let's dig into this A, B, and C and kind of go through that. What's that like for you?
So I think the biggest thing, there's 2 things. One is kind of having a framework to perform like a risk analysis. So that's something that I use and have used in the past. That's really helpful. And the second thing is getting very used to asking this question no matter what, which is, what are the blockers to you completing work? Because if you know what's stopping people from completing their work, like their daily tasks or whatever it is you're trying to study, as you start to hear struggles within your product, you can map it back to the blocker. And if that thing is a work blocker, it is important. So that's one thing. Two, in terms of like risk analysis, one of the biggest things for me is understanding what creates trust in the product, and it's going to be different depending on the product, right? So like a good example that kind of spans all products, I think, is pricing. There's a lot of trust that's built up around pricing, and it is a very delicate thing where you can always give someone start someone at a certain level and give them more, and they'll be happy. But if you give them something and then try to take it away, they feel like they've been cheated, and that will degrade trust. And so figuring out what creates trust within your product, and then aligning the places where they're struggling to that trust. So if the thing they're struggling with is something that in your product creates trust or can break trust if it's violated, that's extremely important. But then you put those in that kind of risk analysis framework, and then it starts to give you an idea of like what struggles that we're seeing are more important than others. And then you can start to prioritize that list and say like, okay, well, if this is a blocker, that means they can't do their work at all, which means we have to fix it. If it's something that's going to degrade trust, your job is to advocate for the user. So you have to be loud about that and make sure that those things get addressed.
Yeah, and it's interesting because different companies have different framing around this, but the idea is the same. Like when I was at Amazon, they used to refer to this as one-way door and two-way door. And pricing is one of those things that you called out, that you have to have that innate understanding that setting a price oftentimes can be like a one-way door. Like if you give a plan and you set a price tag to it, and then at some point you decide to drop the price down for it and make it cheaper, that's great. Like you said, you're building trusted customers. If you give them the same amount of things, like whatever offering you have, and then say, oh, but it's going to be $25 now instead of 20, you're going to be inherently damaging the trust. And not everybody is going to quit your product because of that increase. Like we look at like Netflix and Spotify's of the world that constantly raise their prices, and like, well, like, okay, like do you have another Netflix to go to? Probably not. Okay. But for a lot of other products, that is not the case. Like I know for myself, there's a lot of things where if I would start getting charged for more for the same thing, I'll be looking for alternatives. And inherently, like I think that these are the kind of instincts that you have to develop. Say, okay, but like other than pricing, what else is out there that has similar effects where if we change this, customers will not like it? And I think that's the challenge for a lot of product managers that do not have this understanding of the UX research or just general product research workflow, is that you have to ask those questions. And it's not just about throwing more features at the wall and see what sticks. And I think that actually leads me to the next question, is that for often, product managers specifically try to over index on this concept of experimentation and saying, oh, I'll set up an A B test or an ABC test, and that will tell us what the customers actually prefer. Do you think that's a good substitute for actually doing research, right? Because you could argue that to some degree, you could probably test this in front of users, not at the same scale, of course, but, or is it complementary to the research process?
I personally think it's complementary, and in some cases, it actually can be used on its own. But I think, uh, I think you have to understand the limitations of a multi-arm test. Um, so if you've got like this, or I guess a multivariate test. So the thing that people tend to not do, or they don't understand, is that if you are testing two things or three things, you need to have a control, and then you need to have only one thing that changes. So it makes it so if that's the case, because that's the only way to get good quantitative data from that like experiment, what can you realistically test that's going to give you good enough information like that's worth it? Like if you can only change one thing and have a control, in what cases is that useful? And so that can be useful when you're thinking about if you understand how your users are already using a product, and you understand like where the most interaction happens, which you can get from quantitative information. you could use a test like that to say, to like move information, I mentioned this before, up or below a fold or something small, right? So it's really good in very small cases. I think if you're going to, it's really good to do with qualitative research, like in conjunction, if you can show it to people and have them interact with it, because then you get information beyond just what they're interacting with and why. You can hear from them as they're doing it, what's working and not working. So I think that's extremely useful. And I think anytime you can let somebody test drive whatever it is that you're trying to learn more about is the best way to do it, whether or not it's like doing that with a product that already exists where you're not proposing any changes, you're just watching them do the things that they do in there, or if it's like, hey, we have these proposed changes that we might take, um like that is also really good to say, like, okay, well, um maybe we don't need, or sorry, maybe we can do this like multivariate test while talking to people and learn more information.
It's a balance. It's not a in place replacement. It's not a drop in replacement that you can just say like one of them is better than the other. You have to do it in conjunction.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I found most frustrating over the years is that a lack of understanding about what is the right test for the context of what you're trying to learn. Um, I think that's another part of being a good researcher, is like helping people understand when it's best to apply certain experiments or certain um, tests or surveys, because it may seem, because quantitative data feels so good, because it feels so sure, like it's a lot more difficult to help people understand, like by talking to people it feels more squishy, but you get much better information that can serve you across the entire company.
So how do you determine that? How do you determine what is a good thing to test and what's something that is a distraction? Or I used to refer to them as like the for metrics, people refer to them as like vanity metrics, right? Like the feel good things that we can just throw in front of customers and say, look how great we're doing. Oh, page views, we have millions of them. But when you start kind of digging in, you realize like, yeah, for the product that actually makes like zero difference. How do you determine what's a good thing to test?
When you're, especially if you're coming in new somewhere, or even if you're not and you're just trying to like understand more about your customer in order to improve the product, first thing is always to do an audit and see what already exists. So what quantitative data do you currently have? What qualitative data do you currently have? Assuming you have quantitative data, the thing I always look at next are the biggest drop offs and the gaps. So if you, and you're purely looking for like huge drop offs or like weird anomalies that can't be explained. So you kind of like circle those. Okay, here's the weird anomalies, and then start there. If you are starting with something that's net new, um, I am a big believer in kind of like, we all live in context with more than just the one product, right? So, like, if we have a product, it lives in an ecosystem with other products, with the way that we do our work, et cetera. So, in that case, if it's a brand new product or something, or you don't have quantitative or qualitative data, then I start with customer discovery and understanding what the life cycle of that customer looks like, or what the life cycle of the potential customer might look like. So who is the person that might be using the product, and then who's on either side of that, like who's buying it and who is, if not using it, consuming it. And so you do like an exploration where you start to understand the ecosystem around which, or the ecosystem in which your product would live. And then, you've got this big amount of information, and you can start to narrow it down as you start to see and hear patterns. And as you start to uh, better define who it is you want to serve.
The ecosystem in which your product lives. Yet another thing that a lot of folks, and especially a lot of product managers, make the mistake of is zeroing in on a very narrow feature or component and not thinking that there is very likely a cascading effect that comes from that feature launching to other things, or the presence of other features can impact that as well. So it's not just the fact that, oh, we tested the button going from red to green, it's now acting differently. It's also about, well, okay, but there is a lot of other like confounding variables that exist, and you kind of have to learn to differentiate between those.
Yeah, and I think too, it's also the product, your product will live within an ecosystem of many other things. Like, we're um, like if we use Google Calendars to schedule things, we might talk on Zoom and then we're following up on Slack, and so it's like, there's an ecosystem. How do things connect? How does your thing live within that person's ecosystem? Because if it doesn't work, with their ecosystem, if it doesn't work with their workflow, why would they pick
Right,
it?
exactly. And this is precisely kind of the very, very important call out here for folks listening that want to kind of build out that product muscle is that your product is usually one of the many things that a customer uses. And I remember there was an analogy a few years back where somebody mentioned that it is a rainforest, not a walled garden. Like we always kind of have this natural assumption to say like, oh, we're building product, like we are company X, we're building product Y, this is what we're building. But it's not all as well delimited once you get in the wild and you start seeing the customers, like you said, like somebody uses Zoom for calls and then they jump into Google Calendar for invites, and then somebody messages them on Slack and they have to jump over there. And it's your product is a part of this workflow. It's not just the workflow. Now, let's talk a bit more about your career. So you have done quite a few things, including, so I hear, content strategy and like even like some information architecture. Jumping between those, like I mean, they're kind of from an uninformed opinion like myself. It seems like they're quite different. How did you make the transition?
I think that it kind of happened organically, but also the more I got used to and interested in telling stories, the more my career evolved. And so once I understood that, like, the better story that I told, the more opportunity I had, and like the more I could affect change, I that then allowed me to move into different roles. So it started out with the content strategy stuff and like the copywriting, which is basically a part of product marketing, which is also storytelling. You know what I mean? And so then it was like, okay, I liked that, but then I wanted to talk to people. And so I'm already talking to people. And so if I just do more of that, more talking to people and more advocating for them, now I'm just telling their story. Um, and I think it kind of snowballed from there to like, okay, now I'm advocating for customers, which means I have a lot of opinions on product, and so here's why I think we should do this thing with the product. And here's when I think that should happen. You're right. And now you're into product management. And like the role I'm doing now, like I do, I'm a researcher, but I'm doing product and design strategy, where I am basically telling customer stories across product and design to help influence how we are building and what we are building, which again is storytelling.
But with the added, I want to say, complexity of strategy, because storytelling in a very kind of narrow niche area is one thing. Storytelling, here's what we need to build across the company or across a product suite, seems like it would take a different skill set for that, wouldn't it?
I guess, yeah. I mean, it does. I think you have to understand the market. You have to understand the business drivers. You have to understand who's buying, whatever it is you're selling, right? And understand not just the customer, because the customer isn't always the user. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's different. So you have to understand like who's paying for it and who's using it. And in our case, like who may be the consumer, like who's consuming the thing that is being built. So there might even be somebody else that is on the other end of that too. And you have to understand all three of those things, I think, in order to do strategy effectively, because strategy implies that you are making prioritization decisions. It implies that you are looking at the market and seeing what else lives within your own like competitor ecosystem as well. Um, so there's a lot more, I think, business components with strategy that aren't just storytelling.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because now that you mentioned the scope, it reminds me of the analogy of what are some of the more talented professionals in any field, for the record. Like it's not just tech. And the term I use here is T-shaped, which is right, like you have a broad understanding of a lot of things and then a deep understanding on a very specific domain. How does it apply to you? Like, do you feel like you had to develop that kind of T-shaped um, personal skill set, or did it evolve differently?
I think it evolved honestly through me being very curious, because I would say that I I have enough knowledge to be dangerous in a lot of places. Which to the detriment maybe of other people. I don't know.
Not
Hopefully not.
necessarily.
But
No,
you know what
close
I mean?
together.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's like I have a lot of, and I can back up my reasoning, right? Like I have evidence from research to back up some of these broader things that I'm deciding, or broader things that I think. And I think that actually that T shape came from doing research, because I would hear so many different things. And over time was able to kind of piece them together and be like, oh, well, what they're talking about actually is more on the marketing side. Oh, what they're talking about now is more on like an operations issue, or more on like a back end issue that's like something to do with performance, or. And so as things came up, I wanted to understand I wanted to better understand the problem that people were having. And so by doing that, you start to kind of learn a little bit more about each area, so that you can have an informed opinion, even if you're not a complete expert in it. And honestly, it's more fun, right? At least for me, because like I like to jump. I like being able to jump around and like try different things. I like being able to help out with design and like make things. I like being able to look at product marketing copy and like help craft that external story. So anyway, I find it very fun. And then it's like I always go back to the research as like it's the bedrock of everything, but it allows me to be able to kind of play in a bunch of different spaces and have an informed opinion.
And I think I don't know. There's some degree of beauty to being a generalist, and especially you knew we're gonna get there to the topic of AI.
It came in eventually. I wasn't
it,
sure. I
it's
thought, I don't know.
it's 2025. Well, it's gonna squeeze itself into the conversation at some point. But with that, a lot of people start questioning the value of some of the, I want to say, like human skill that inherently, like, oh well, if I was a web developer before and now I can go in and spin up a website in 5 minutes, like I'll give you a very concrete example. Like for this podcast, I rewrote my entire website with Copilot. Not a plug, by the way. This is my own time. Um, in like 2 evenings. So the natural question that always comes along is the human skill set, the inherent, like if I could do something before as an individual, now AI can do that too. I rebuilt my entire podcast website in 2 evenings, and I'm not a web developer by any stretch. right? Like Jason is a much better web developer than I am, but I think my site turned out okay. So it kind of begs the question, like, is there more value in the future in being a generalist where you can do a lot of things and have a good sense of design, a good sense of, I kind of know what to build, a good sense of the kinds of questions that I need to ask for my customers when building my product, because very narrow specialization seems kind of dangerous. I don't know. Like, what do you think?
I think that a narrow specialization in any age is dangerous. I
That's a
I don't
controversial opinion.
I
Okay. Yeah.
know, but I mean unless it's something that is in the sciences. Like I don't want a cancer researcher to be a generalist. But you know what I mean? Like I don't want a neurosurgeon to be a generalist. But like I think in a lot of cases being a generalist is going to in any day and age serve you better. I didn't realize that was controversial. I'm excited for my hot take that I didn't know I had.
Especially in tech, because, right, like there's a lot of debate about, should I do one thing and be the best at it, or should I combine many? And that's actually one of the things that it never kind of set well with me, because now that I mentioned, it's like, be the best at one thing. And it's like, well, what are the odds that you're going to be the best 1% or 5% in the world at something?
Yes. Yes. And
Versus I'm the best 10 to 25% if I combine several Lego bricks.
I think it's that. So like one thing is like so one thing is like, are you going to ever be the best top whatever, like you said? That's a consideration. Two, like if we're talking about ecosystems, you know I'm gonna like shove nature into this no matter like I always do that. But like if you're thinking about diversification, having a more diverse skill set, it's like biodiversity. It's more resilient. If you are able to have a more diverse skill set, that allows you to be able to apply that skill set in a lot of different ways, regardless of how things might change, because you have so little, your locus of control around your work is both a lot smaller and a lot bigger than we think, right? It's like when we get into a job, our locus of control is actually quite large. But when we think about all of the jobs that are available to us that we're able to do, our locus of control is a lot smaller. So how do you like manifest more luck and like give yourself more opportunity? And I think that diversification is how you do it. And if we're talking about AI,
Sure. Yeah.
if
We'll
we're talking
continue the
about
topic.
AI,
Yes.
no, I know, but if we're talking about AI, I think too, I talked earlier about knowing how to ask good questions. And that is something that I think is going to be huge as we get more and more into this, understanding how to ask questions that garner, not if not true, at least good answers, and like understanding how to communicate um, is going to be even more important. Um, so, and I think from a human skill set point, like things are always changing, right? Like I think there's always upset when there's a huge technological change. Um, but I think we learn typically to adapt to the change and then get that new tool and use it within our workflow. Um, and I guess in this case, it's like, what can it do really well that we find useful?
And that's the part where I think, I know some people, for example, again, like in this, I think in the age of AI, we have two very kind of radical sides of the kind of the spectrum. On one side, where it's like, it's gonna do everything, it's gonna solve every single problem imaginable, we will not need humans for everything. And there's kind of the fatalist side, which is like, it's gonna destroy everything, it's gonna be horrible. And it, like, realistically, I don't know, like, I'm kind of in between, where I'm just like, yeah, it I don't necessarily think it's gonna take away my job, but it's gonna help me be more productive. It's gonna help me maybe, scale myself a little bit better. Like, I'm not as scared about the fact that, it now can do these things, because of, for example, for UX research, a good UX researcher is so much more than just like looking at a table of data and be like, this customer clearly is interested in this. Like, it's not just that. It's not a plain answer. Like, you have to kind of rationalize a lot of these things through, and also lean on a lot of experience, a lot of context, a lot of human interaction that, bits and bytes can do it to an extent, but that extent is, you're going to hit a wall at some point.
You're going to hit a wall, and also the information you get is not going to be good quality. Because I think one of the biggest parts of research that we didn't even talk about is finding the people to talk to and understanding the cohorts that you're talking to. And you can define those however you want, right? Like, I guess technically, if you put that into some type of model like AI system, it could say, okay, this is a customer who spends X amount and is on the app this many times, blah, blah, blah. But like, unless you talk to them, there's context that you'll never get. And so it might be someone that is I think every product probably has people that are super users, but they're super users for different reasons. And there are reasons that you may not be able to see through data alone, that you would have to learn over time talking with your customer base. I also think if we're talking about AI, what it's going to take away or whatever, it's like, I worry far more about the climate impacts of it than it taking away my work or my job or whatever. Like, I feel like the climate impacts are going to hit us before it's good enough to take away all our jobs. So, I personally think we don't need to worry about that as much. It would be cool if it could like do my laundry or something though.
I know.
Let's make it really useful.
I want to get a robot that can do all the housework, and like, you want to repair that fence? Yeah, go ahead, by all means.
Yes, I have a task. I have a list of tasks.
I know we've been talking about a lot of UX research stuff, a lot of product stuff. It's been super fun. And I want to ask a question that I ask of all my guests, and that is, for somebody that listens to this, are probably listening to this and be like, wow, well, Marisa's doing some awesome things. I want to do more like, things like that. What would be one piece of unconventional advice that you would share with somebody that is listening to the show that is a hashtag Marisa wisdom?
Study nature, because every single thing that we do in work, the way that we work within systems, the way that we work within a community, like as we are like in a team, all of that, every single thing for me has come back to natural systems and how natural systems work, because it's like literally just how the world works. And so I think you can learn a lot by studying interactions with nature and understanding how ecosystems work and how natural systems work, and then applying that to like how you communicate with your team, how you think about a product ecosystem, how you think about a customer ecosystem or a customer workflow. I use nature and natural systems for a lot of the basis of my reasoning and explaining how things actually work together.
This is a very wholesome and universally applicable unconventional advice. This is great. Marisa, for folks that want to learn more about what you're building, what you're doing, where should they go?
MarisaMorby.com has all of my stuff in one spot. So I do a lot of science communication. So you'll see a lot of that on there. And I have a science communication newsletter. And I put all my art and stuff on there too. So it's the one-stop shop.
And infographics. I saw like the bee infographic. It's fantastic. I love it.
Thank you.
We're going to link to all of these from the show notes, so you don't have to, listen, type in, just click the links. Marisa has a lot of awesome resources. Thank you, Marisa, for being here. This has been fantastic talking to you today.
Thank you so much. I had a lot of fun.